This is the Mathews Lift. The Lift, of course, is Mathews' flagship bow for 2024, and they sent this to me back in November. In fact, I think it was a couple of days after the official release date of the bow. The bow comes, of course, in the 29.5-inch version and then also a 33-inch version. They shipped me the 29.5-inch model, and so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it today and some of the things I like and some of the things I don't like. I actually got the bow late on a Friday evening. I left early the next morning for our deer lease in Blanco. Over the course of the next couple of days, I spent some time setting the bow up, just getting a real quick setup. I continued to hunt with my Phase 4 33, which is last year's model bow that I really like. This has been probably my favorite Mathews of all time. In fact, I know it is. It's my favorite Mathews bow to shoot. So after a couple of days, I had the bow set up. I put the sight on it. I actually had a little bit of trouble tuning it there at the lease. I had a little makeshift tuning rack and I wasn't able to get it properly paper tuned. So I took it over to Stonewall, which is nearby. I took it to an archery shop called Los Cazadores, and the fine folks over there were able to help me get it tuned. We had to change out some of the top hats, which I didn't have the ability to do there at the lease. So I spent the rest of the 2023-24 whitetail season here in Texas hunting with this bow. I carried it to various tree stand setups. I hunted out of it a couple of ground blinds. I did have a couple of shot opportunities that I chose not to take there at our lease in Blanco, but I also had an invite to hunt with a friend of mine down in South Texas. He needed to shoot some does, and I was able to shoot a doe with it. Anyway, I feel like I've got a pretty good feel for the way this bow shoots compared to the Mathews Phase 4. Now, of course, they're a little bit different bows because this is the 33 and what I have here is the 29.5. If you've watched some of my previous bow videos, you know that the Traverse was one of my favorite bows, which was 34-inch axle to axle. The Phase 4 33 is my favorite shooting bow that Mathews has come out with, and so I prefer a longer axle to axle bow. But I wanted to spend some time with the 29.5 bow and just see how I like it compared to the Phase 4 33. So real quickly, let's just talk about some of the engineering and some of the design of the Lift bows. So the Lift is really a complete redesign of the bow. They completely redesigned almost every component of this bow, from the riser to the limbs, to the limb pockets. The cams are different, and even to the match string that they put on it. It's pretty evident from some of the marketing stuff that Mathews' primary intent with the Lift was to reduce weight. In fact, they advertised that they came up with a sub 4-pound bow, which they did. The 29.5 axle to axle version comes in at 3.99 pounds, so they did achieve their sub 4-pound objective with an aluminum riser bow. The Phase 4 29-inch axle to axle bow is 4.48 pounds, I believe, so almost a full half pound of a difference. As far as the 33-inch axle to axle bows go, the Phase 4 came in right at 4.7, I think 4.68 pounds or something like that. And the Lift is 4.26 pounds advertised. So again, about a half pound difference between the two different models. So it is a substantial difference in weight, so they were able to achieve their primary objective. The primary way I think they were able to shave weight is through the riser. You'll notice a lot more in the skeletal frame of it, a lot larger cutouts in it. So they're able to shave a lot of the material off of it while still maintaining the rigidity and the strength of the riser. Another way that they were able to reduce the weight of the bow is by completely re-engineering the limbs, the limb pockets, and even the axles of the bow. So the limbs themselves are the RPD limbs. They still have the vibration dampeners in between the individual limbs here. So they were able to make them slightly thinner and then also significantly shorter than the previous limbs that they had. They went from a through the limb axle that they had before. They had to go a little bit thicker where the axle goes into the limbs, and they actually mounted now the axle system on top of the limbs. According to the Mathews engineers, that also maximizes the performance of the limbs because you don't have that axle going through the limbs. They also changed out the limb pockets, so they actually mount into the riser itself instead of having a separate steel plate or buttons. They also changed the cam system on the bow, so they moved from their very successful cross-centric cam with the switch weight design to what they're calling a switch weight X. So if you take a look at the cams kind of side by side here, you'll notice it probably a little bit more of an aggressive cam on the newer model bows than on previous models. So they were able to achieve a little bit more speed out of the new cams while still maintaining a smooth draw cycle. And so I know a lot of people have talked about the bows stacking kind of at the front end, but it's still a very smooth, consistent draw cycle all the way through, not a big hump as you roll over. Now it is a little bit different feel, especially going from the 33 inch that I'm accustomed to the 29.5, but after shooting it a few times and throughout the rest of the season, it's not something that was extremely noticeable. I'm going to pause the video right there real quick. While I was editing the video, I decided to come out and shoot both of the bows back to back. The 29.5 inch lift, and then immediately following that with a 33 inch phase 4. And I can say that on the initial part of the draw, it does stack a little bit more on the lift 29.5. So at the beginning of the draw cycle, it's a little bit heavier right at the beginning of the draw. It does stay consistent all the way through. The 33 inch was a little bit smoother right at the beginning of the draw cycle, stayed smooth throughout, and just a better feel in my opinion. Also at the release of the arrow, I did feel a little bit more of a hand vibration, hand shock in the lift than I did with the Phase 433, but there we are comparing apples to oranges a little bit with the 29.5 inch axle to axle of the lift compared to the 33 inch of the Phase 4. But I did want to address both of those while I was thinking about it, and now we'll return you back to your original video. There was one complaint a lot of people had about Mathews bows in the past from the factory. It's that the strings, a lot of people would change those out, and so Mathews decided that they would spend a little bit of time on new string, and so they came out with the match strings, and I think that's a pretty significant difference as well. So pretty much wholesale changes across the whole bow, from the riser to the limbs, limb pockets, axle design, the cams, the strings. About the only thing that they didn't change from previous year model bows was the engaged grip, and strangely enough, there's a lot of people that if they complain about Mathews bows, aside from the string, it's the grip on the bows, but that can of course be customized and changed. In fact, I may change my grip out. As far as the other components and accessories for the bow, they still retain the dovetail mount on the rear of the riser for mounting the Ultra Rest Integrate MX. They did introduce a version 2 of the Integrate MX Rest, which I have on here right now. They still offer their bridge lock system for the sight and for the stabilizer. Now the combination of the bridge lock and the integrated rest also allows attachment of the low profile quiver, which I have here. And so I've got the removable quiver here, and I really like the quiver. I know I talked about this in a previous video, but I love having this quiver full of arrows that is so tight to the bow, and that can only be achieved because of the bridge lock. It allows me to either hunt with the arrows on it, which I do probably 50% of the time. But more importantly, it allows me to put the whole bow, quiver, everything, arrows into my case without having it sticking way up. I can close the case and it stays all attached. The bridge lock sight system also allows me to switch out sights. So I can just unscrew the set screw, remove, say, my 3-pin slider here. I've got a fixed pin on my Phase 4, so I can easily go from the movable slider to a fixed pin. So if I'm shooting the Total Archery Challenge with shots out to 100+ yards, I can go with a slider. And if I decide for whitetail season that I just want a more simple fixed pin design so I don't have to forget about things, I can just switch those out. As far as the other accessories, still has the Silent Connect system, which I didn't transition over, but you can see it allows you to put a bow rope or the sling on, so that can be switched between the different bow models. There are a couple things that can't be switched, and kind of a little bit frustrating because of the cost of those. One is the engaged limb legs. The limb legs that fit the previous model bows from the Phase 4 and the previous model bows from that do not fit because of the limb pocket redesign. They don't fit the lift model bows, and I think those are $80 retail, and so that's having to reinvest in those. I really like those. I love having the engaged limb legs to keep the cam, the riser, and the bow off of the ground, but At that cost, having to replace it, I could see would be a little bit frustrating. And then similarly, we've got the stay afield system. This is the one I have for the 33-inch axle-to-axle Phase 4. They list a separate one for the 33-inch lift. Now, I can't imagine that there would be a significant difference in those, but they do list them separately on the order form. And so I'm going to verify that with Mathews, but it looks like they may not be cross-compatible. All right, let's go back and talk about some of the actual specs between the two models of the lift, and then we'll, for comparison's sake, we'll compare them to the similar specs of the Phase 4. So as far as the Switch Weight X mods go, they added a wider range of different mods that you can get. The previous mods went from a minimum of 60-pound draw weight on the low end for the Phase 4, and all the way up to 75 pounds on the high end, and that was in 10-pound increments. One of the things they did is they expanded that range. You can get a 55-pound draw weight mod for the lift, all the way up to 80-pound mods, and that's in 5-pound increments. So they added a whole new array of draw weight mods to it. As far as the brace height goes, the 29.5-inch lift and the 29-inch Phase 4 both have a 6-inch brace height, and then the 33-inch models each have a 6.5-inch brace height. Again, one of the reasons I prefer the longer axle-to-axle bows is because you get an increase in that brace height, which in theory is going to result in a more forgiving bow. On the surface, you would think, well, they're the same for the 29 models and the 33-inch models, but I know one of the things that they did is the riser is a little bit straighter, so a little less of a deflex design. So even though both of them have a 6-inch brace height, that slightly less deflex riser is going to result in a little bit more forgiveness compared to the same models from the previous year. So as far as draw length ranges go, the lift 29.5 ranges from 24.5 inches all the way up to 30 inches. That 24 inches is an inch less than was available with the 29-inch Phase 4, and similarly on the 33-inch models, it goes from 26 all the way up to 30.5. Last year's model went from 27 to 30.5. Each of the models comes available with either 80 or 85% let off, and as I mentioned before, as far as speed ranges go, they increase the IBO speeds 8 feet per second on the 29.5 versus the 29, and it's, I think, slightly lower than that on the 33-inch models. I think the primary objective for Mathews this year was to reduce the weight of the bow while still maintaining the durability and the strength of the bow and without sacrificing speed, and I think they were able to accomplish that. All right, so with that out of the way, let me give you kind of my take on the lift 29.5, and I'll do a little bit of a comparison to the 33 and kind of talk about where I'm going to go from here. So I was able to spend, say, from mid-November through the end of December hunting with a bow and shooting it a little bit. I think it's a great shooting bow. It's smooth, probably not as dead in the hand as certainly not the 33-inch Phase 4. I will say, if I were to pick up this bow, hunt with it, probably it's not something that I would say, hey, this is louder or more vibration than previous models. That said, from the string angle to the balance, I feel like the 33-inch Phase 4 gave me a lot better shootability and balance and just better feel than I was able to get with the 29.5-inch lift. So I really think it's a great shooting bow. I would encourage you to go out and shoot it. If you like the shorter axle-to-axle bows and shoot those well, I think you'll be well served purchasing the 29.5. As for me, I actually prefer shooting the original Phase 4. Again, I think it's more of a factor of it being the longer axle-to-axle, and that's just something that I prefer shooting. I'm more comfortable with. I feel like it gives me a lot better stability, a lot more forgiveness. So I'm not going to be keeping the lift 29.5. But I am going to order the 33-inch version so I can start shooting it here in the off season. I'm not sure how long it's going to take to get to me, but once I get it, I'll be able to shoot it. I'm preparing for the Colorado Total Archery Challenge coming up in July, so hopefully I'll have it in plenty of time for that. I can shoot it side by side with the 33-inch Phase 4, and then I'll make a decision which bow I want to keep and which one I want to either give away or sell or whatever the case may be. I think Mathews has done a remarkable job in coming up with a completely new bow. It gets harder and harder each year to come up with new technology, new ideas, and I think Mathews works as hard as anybody else at it. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of other good bows out there. Mathews is a sponsor of TexasBowhunter.com, and so I have a little bit of a bias there. I'm trying to give you as unbiased an opinion as I can, though, and I think this will be a great bow, certainly if you're in the market for a new bow, to go shoot it side by side with the other model bows, shoot it side by side with other brands of bows, and go with the one that you feel shoots the best. As for me, again, I'll be selling the 29.5, replacing it with the 33. So look for that video coming up. It'll probably be a couple of months before I get that bow and can get it set up and shoot them side by side. But I will do a side by side comparison before I either get rid of my trusty Phase 4 and continue with the Lift, or if I decide to sell the Lift and just stay with this Phase 4, which I really enjoy shooting. So anyway, just wanted to give you kind of an update on that. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comment section below. Certainly, if you want to join us over at TexasBowhunter.com, we have a very active discussion forum community there. So feel free to post there. Any questions that you may have, you can post there, and there'll be a handful of people that will be able to give you their insights. I'll be happy to give you mine there or on the YouTube community as well. So again, thank you for joining me, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.